A giant's dream. The gingham dress, snug across her back, threatened to split with each gesture. Tallulah navigated the gaggle of women buzzing around Mrs. Abernathy's quilt, each a delicate bloom compared to her own towering presence. Light chatter, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, echoed off the store's pressed tin ceiling. She felt like a rhino in a dollhouse, a sentiment that dogged her steps. "Mercy, Tallulah, watch yourself," Mrs. Abernathy warbled, clutching a thread spool protectively. "You'll send those figurines tumbling." Tallulah mumbled an apology, heat blooming in her face. The porcelain dolls remained undisturbed, yet it was irrelevant. Her size announced her arrival, a persistent reminder of her misfit status. A glimpse in the dusty counter mirror revealed a gentle giant, eyes soft with perpetual apology. The other women chattered about the approaching Founders' Day dance, their voices bright with anticipation of coveted invitations. Tallulah didn't dare entertain such fantasies. What man would desire a spouse who dwarfed him? One capable, perhaps, of hoisting him skyward with a casual lift? Feigning a sudden bout of illness, she escaped into the welcome embrace of the sun-drenched street. The Oklahoma heat, a parched, insistent presence, was preferable to the stifling air of the general store. She headed towards the town's edge, each step devouring the distance. She craved air, space for contemplation, a reprieve from the constant awareness of being different. The library offered sanctuary, a haven of hushed tones and the comforting aroma of aged paper. Miss Alara, the librarian, a diminutive figure with spectacles perched precariously on her nose, greeted her with quiet knowing. "Seeking solace, Tallulah?" A wan smile was Tallulah's reply. Miss Alara understood without needing explanation. No mention of stature, no empty words of comfort, just the silent offering of books, gateways to imagined worlds. But today, fantasy held no allure. She drifted to the back, to the neglected corner where mail-order bride catalogs lay dormant. A clandestine longing, a shameful desire, drew her in. She turned the brittle pages, fingers tracing the faded images of women hoping for a fresh start, a chance at joy. Others might see desperation in their eyes, lonely souls willing to settle for anyone to escape hardship. Tallulah saw something more, a fragile ember of hope, a profound longing for connection, a longing she knew intimately. She paused at a catalog from a Denver agency, arrested by an advertisement for a Montana rancher. Jebediah, the text declared, a man of the land, diligent and strong, in search of a capable woman to share his life. A strange pull resonated within her, a faint possibility. That evening, under the moon's pale watch, Tallulah penned her first letter to Jebediah. No mention of her towering height. Instead, she wrote of her devotion to books, the allure of constellations, aspirations for a modest farm. She confided her loneliness, her longing for belonging. Weeks bled into months, each day colored by the anticipation of the postman's arrival. Each letter from Jebediah was a beacon, a flicker of light against the dark canvas of her discontent. He depicted his ranch, the endless sky, the quiet grandeur of the Montana wilderness. He yearned for a partner, someone to share both the burdens and the blessings of frontier life. His words lacked artifice, yet possessed a profound sincerity. He seemed to see beyond her physical form, valuing her mind and spirit. He sought her opinions, her aspirations, her vulnerabilities. In return, Tallulah found herself revealing truths she'd never shared with another soul. One autumn afternoon, a letter arrived accompanied by a photograph. Jebediah stood before his ranch house, a time-worn structure with a welcoming porch and a spiraling plume of smoke. A man of substantial height himself, lean and broad-shouldered, with a kind countenance and eyes etched with the marks of laughter. Not conventionally handsome, but radiating a quiet strength that spoke to her soul. "Tallulah," he wrote, "our correspondence has been a true pleasure. I believe I know you better than many I've met face to face. If you're willing, I'd like to send you a ticket to Montana. Come see if this life suits you." No obligación, no commitments. Just a chance to see if we might build something together. Tallulah held the letter close, her pulse quickening. Anxiety mingled with exhilaration, doubt vying with anticipation. This was the precipice, the deciding moment. Remain in harmony, Oklahoma, forever on the periphery, forever yearning. Or take a daring leap, risk everything, and venture into the unknown. She studied the photograph once more, Jebediah's kind eyes and the vast Montana sky behind him. She pictured herself by his side, feeling the prairie wind, breathing the crisp mountain air. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she permitted herself to dream. That very night, she composed her reply. Jebediah, she wrote, her hand trembling, thank you. I accept. I'll be on the next train to Montana. Journey to redemption. The station reeked of spent fuel and unspoken goodbyes. Tallulah clasped her mother's hand, feeling the fragility of bone beneath thin skin. I'll ride without fail, Mama, every blessed week. The lively spark usually dancing in her mother's eyes was dimmed by worry. Montana, it's a world away, child. So unlike everything you know, Tallulah fought back a wave of emotion. I have to see if I can make it work, Mama. I can't stagnate here, feeling like Gulliver among the Lilliputians. A piercing whistle shattered the stillness. The train groaned, a metal leviathan stirring. Jebediah, sounds like a decent sort, her mother offered, her voice wavering. A man who appreciates you for who you are, not just your impressive height. Tallulah mustered a feeble smile. He does seem to, Mama. Deep down, I think he does. She enveloped her mother in a gentle embrace, mindful of her delicate frame. Don't you worry. I'll visit before the year's out, perhaps with a real-life cowboy in tow. Her mother offered a weak chuckle, laced with tears. Mind you do now. With a final wave, Tallulah wrestled her weighty valise, the scuffed leather a testament to generations of journeys, and awkwardly boarded the train. From her window seat, she watched her mother dwindle to a lonesome figure on the platform, a handkerchief clutched tight. As the train jolted forward, Tallulah dashed away a stray tear, fixing her gaze on the retreating landscape, a landscape that had never truly embraced her. The journey proved a gauntlet. Days dissolved into a repetitive cycle of clicking rails, weak coffee, and the mesmerizing blur of the Western Plains. Tallulah, crammed into a space far too small, registered every shudder and sway. A dull ache settled in her knees and back, her mind a swirling vortex of anticipation and apprehension. Her fellow travelers, a diverse collection of farmers, traveling salesmen, and hopeful prospectors, scrutinized her with a blend of curiosity and poorly concealed amusement. Fragments of conversations reached her ears, hushed murmurs about her size, labeling her that giantess bound for the territories. Tallulah tuned them out, immersing herself in the well-worn pages of Pride and Prejudice, finding refuge in Elizabeth Bennet's sharp wit and fierce independence. Nightfall brought a discordant symphony of snores, coughs, and rustling blankets. Unable to find a comfortable position, Tallulah often lay awake, gazing at the celestial tapestry, picturing her new existence in redemption. She conjured Jebediah's image, his features reflecting the raw beauty of the Montana terrain. She imagined learning to ride, the wind screaming in her ears as they raced across the open range. She envisioned a snug cabin, fragrant with wood smoke and freshly baked bread, their laughter echoing in the rafters. But then anxieties would slither in, like creeping tendrils, suffocating her optimistic visions. What if Jebediah was let down when he saw her in the flesh? What if her letters had fabricated a false impression, a portrait of a woman she could never truly embody? What if she was simply too much for him to handle? She revisited Jebediah's letters, seeking solace in his written words. He had emphasized her intellect, her spirit, her unique perspective. He had never once alluded to her physical stature. Perhaps, she hoped, he truly saw past the towering facade she presented to the world and perceived the person within. One evening, as the train clattered across a particularly barren stretch of land, Tallulah engaged in conversation with a silver-haired woman across the aisle. The woman, her face etched with a map of time and kindness, introduced herself as Martha. "Headed west, are you, dear?" Martha inquired, her voice a gentle rasp. Tallulah nodded. "To Montana, to meet a friend." Martha offered a knowing smile. "A friend, is it? Well, Montana's a vast place, teeming with possibilities, and its share of tribulations. But it can also be a sanctuary where a soul finds itself, if it has the gumption to search." Tallulah hesitated, then shared her worries with Martha, her fear of being an outsider, of being judged solely on her dimensions. Martha listened attentively, her eyes radiating understanding. When Tallulah finished, she reached out and squeezed her hand. "Child," she said softly, "there'll always be those who try to diminish you, make you feel inadequate. But you can't let them succeed. You must cling to your own self-worth, your own inner strength. And don't apologize for taking up space. You have every right to be here, same as anyone else." Martha's words struck a chord deep within Tallulah. She straightened her posture, her shoulders loosening. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could navigate this. Perhaps she could carve out a niche for herself in this boundless, unfamiliar territory. Maybe redemption wasn't just a town, but a chance for her own personal liberation, a chance to finally embrace herself, every glorious inch of her 6'4" frame. As the train finally screeched to a halt at the Redemption Depot, hours behind schedule, Tallulah inhaled deeply, the invigorating mountain air filling her lungs. This was it, the moment of reckoning. She disembarked onto the platform, her pulse hammering in her chest, and scanned the crowd, seeking the face she had only encountered in her imaginings. A town of whispers. Redemption, Montana, a town woven from hushed secrets. They swirled with the prairie wind, ghosting down sun-baked streets, murmuring under the eaves of time-worn houses. As Tallulah descended from the train, her meager belongings clutched tight, she felt that collective murmur sharpen, a palpable scrutiny pinning her in place. Heads pivoted, conversations fractured. A cluster of children, momentarily abandoning their marbles, pointed and snickered, their voices thin and high in the arid air. Even the station's resident canine, a scruffy mongrel with a perpetually inquisitive ear, fixed her with an unnerving stare. Tallulah struggled to ignore the unwelcome attention, her gaze sweeping the sparse gathering for a face lifted from a faded photograph, Jebediah Stone. She'd committed his features to memory, the etched lines radiating from his eyes, the resolute set of his jaw, the unruly dark hair that kissed his brow. The platform was a mere splinter of wood, the crowd equally modest, mostly sun-weathered ranchers and their kin, faces tanned to leather. Disappointment, a chilling premonition, began to constrict her chest. Had he reconsidered? Had her last plea even reached him? Then she saw him, propped against a weathered post, arms folded, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring his gaze. He possessed greater stature than she'd imagined, his frame broader, his denim jacket stretched across formidable shoulders. He watched, his expression an impenetrable mask. Tallulah inhaled deeply and began to move towards him, her steps hesitant on the uneven planks. As she neared, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a fleeting expression, surprise perhaps, before his features resolved into their former stoicism. He straightened as she approached, tipping his hat back. "Miss Bellwether," his voice resonated, a low thrum like distant thunder. "Mr. Stone?" she responded, a touch breathless. A nod, his gaze taking inventory of her from head to toe. The weight of his assessment was undeniable, and the surrounding whispers seemed to amplify, dancing around her like miniature cyclones. A flush bloomed on her neck. "You're taller than I anticipated," he stated, the words hanging in the sun-drenched space between them. Tallulah steeled herself. This was it, the rejection she'd silently braced for during the long journey. She'd mentally composed, practiced rejoinders, graceful retreats, but now, confronted with his presence, her mind emptied. Then a slow smile softened his face, etching crow's feet around his eyes. "Welcome to redemption, Miss Bellwether." He reached for a carpet bag. "Let's get you to the ranch." The ranch defied Tallulah's preconceived notions. Her imagination had conjured images of a sprawling domain, an emblem of prosperity. Instead, she found simplicity, a modest, time-worn cabin nestled in a secluded valley, cradled by undulating hills and grazing cattle. The barn, while solid, bore the marks of time, its wooden planks bleached and fissured. A dilapidated lean-to housed tools and equipment, all cloaked in a layer of dust. As they pulled up before the cabin in Jebediah's battered Ford pickup, a flicker of disenchantment touched her. But then she noticed the explosion of wildflowers erupting along the fence, their radiant hues a vibrant counterpoint to the subdued tones of the landscape. And she observed the deep affection with which Jebediah regarded the land, a quiet pride illuminating his features. He cut the engine and faced her. "It ain't much," he admitted, a note of apology in his voice, "but it's home." Tallulah smiled. "It's tranquil," she replied, and her voice resonated with sincerity. A sense of profound peace permeated the place, a quiet resilience that touched her soul. He assisted her from the truck, his touch surprisingly gentle as his hand steadied her arm. Their fingers brushed, sending a surprising current through her, a spark both unsettling and intriguing. He guided her towards the cabin, the wooden porch protesting with a weary groan beneath their weight. He pushed open the door, revealing a single room, sparsely adorned but impeccably clean. A compact stove occupied one corner. A table and a pair of chairs stood at the center, and a bed was nestled discreetly against the far wall. A lone window framed a view of the serene valley. "I hope it suits you," he said, his gaze searching her face. Tallulah stepped inside, the worn fabric of her carpet bag brushing against her leg. She surveyed the room, absorbing the unadorned details, the time-worn rug on the floor, the lovingly stitched quilt draped across the bed. It lacked opulence, yet it felt undeniably genuine. "It's perfect, Mr. Stone," she said, the sincerity in her voice surprising even herself. "Thank you." He nodded, a trace of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Just Jeb," he corrected. "Call me Jeb." Finding her place. The henhouse reeked of ammonia and plucked fowl, a rough-hewn wooden box squatting in the yard. That morning, Jeb had indicated it with a curt eggs. Tallulah had envisioned a quaint domestic scene, herself in a gingham apron, gathering brown and white orbs into a woven basket. The reality was anything but. A raucous flock, a feathered scrum of beaks and claws, greeted her arrival with suspicion. They erupted in a flurry of feathers and indignant cackles, a swirling vortex of avian disapproval. The nesting boxes, size for a child, demanded she origami herself into a painful crouch, her long frame a study in awkward angles. She managed a handful, 2 casualties succumbing to her too enthusiastic grip. The viscous yolk slicked her hand, an open invitation for a particularly audacious hen who pecked with determined fervor at her knuckles. "Get away!" she cried, shooing the bird with a frustrated wave, warmth prickling her face. Gingerly, she salvaged the remaining eggs, her spine a chorus of complaint. This wasn't the refined, fulfilling pastoral life she'd dreamt of. This was calamitous. The general store offered no respite. Jeb, preoccupied with a calving cow, had tasked Tallulah with procuring flour and sugar. Silence descended the instant she crossed the threshold. Every pair of eyes, a collection of lined faces and wide-eyed youngsters, swiveled towards her. She felt like a sequoia in a forest of saplings. Mrs. Abernathy, the proprietress, a woman whose circumference rivaled Tallulah's height, scrutinized her over spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "You're Stone's new bride, ain't you? The one from the city." A statement, not a question. Tallulah squared her shoulders, forcing a pleasant expression. "Yes, I am. Tallulah Bellwether." A low murmur vibrated through the room. A stifled giggle escaped someone's lips. The flush intensified on Tallulah's face. "Heard you were built," Mrs. Abernathy commented, her gaze making a slow, deliberate inventory. "Jeb usually goes for the petite kind. Easier to handle, I imagine." "I assure you, Jeb is perfectly capable," Tallulah retorted, the words laced with more edge than she intended. She slammed the flour and sugar on the counter, the thump echoing the beat of her rising annoyance. The return trip to the ranch unfolded in tight-lipped quiet. Tallulah glued her gaze to the passing landscape, the vast Montana sky, usually a balm, doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. The store scene replayed itself in her mind, each whispered barb a fresh sting. She was a misfit here, too tall, too gauche, too citified. That evening, as Jeb ate his supper, a quiet ritual, Tallulah found herself drawn to the window. The sunset blazed, an extravagant canvas of fiery hues, a spectacle that should have inspired wonder. Instead, it underscored her solitude. She yearned for her friends, her books, the urbane hum of the city. She craved the cloak of anonymity, the freedom to disappear into the crowd. "Jeb," she began, her voice almost lost in the quiet. He lifted his gaze, his blue eyes holding a question. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, the words spilling out in a torrent. "I'm hopeless at the chores. The people here, they stare. I feel like a curiosity." Jeb carefully placed his fork beside his plate, his gaze steady and unwavering. "This ain't a cakewalk," he conceded, his voice gravelly. "Ranching, it's a hard life. These folks, they're wary, slow to warm up to outsiders." He paused, searching for the correct sentiment. Tallulah held her breath, steeling herself for the inevitable disappointment. "But you ain't a curiosity, Tallulah," he finally said, his tone surprisingly tender. "You're just different, and different ain't necessarily a curse." He offered no panaceas, no glib reassurances. Yet, in that moment, his simple acceptance, his quiet acknowledgement of her struggle, felt substantial. It wasn't a passionate declaration, but it was something real, a fragile thread in the immensity of Montana. Watching him return to his meal, she knew she wouldn't flee tonight, or perhaps ever. She would struggle, she would falter, but she would persevere. For Jeb, for this unforgiving land, and perhaps for a nascent part of herself. A cowboy's defense. The bell over the Higgins General Store door chimed, announcing their arrival. A blend of smoked hams and aged burlap hung heavy in the air, a scent usually a comfort to Tallulah. Today, it felt like the very walls were scrutinizing her. Jebediah's weathered hand rested lightly on the curve of her back, a wordless offering of reassurance that barely chipped away at her anxiety. Flour, sugar, coffee. The basics Jeb had scrawled on a scrap of paper. Weaving through the crowded aisles felt like navigating a hostile maze, whispers nipping at her heels. Bart Higgins, his ample girth straining the fabric of his checkered shirt, lounged against the counter, a smirk plastered across his face. He held court with a handful of men, his voice a booming pronouncement for all to hear. As Tallulah and Jeb approached, Bart cut himself off, his gaze lingering on Tallulah with open amusement. "Well now," he drawled, his voice thick with syrup and spite, "if it ain't the newlyweds. Jebediah, didn't realize you needed to rent a crane to kiss your bride these days." Heat blossomed on Tallulah's face. The men around Bart snickered, their eyes bouncing between her and Jeb. She balled her hands into fists, yearning to vanish. Her height, always a source of self-consciousness, felt like a spotlight highlighting her every flaw. Bart's jab only deepened her discomfort. Jebediah's hand tightened on her back, a barely perceptible shift. His jaw hardened, a telltale muscle twitching. Anger was a rare sight with him, but Tallulah could practically feel the waves of it emanating from him. He placed the list on the counter, each movement precise. "Mornin', Bart," Jeb said, his tone even and low, a deliberate contrast to Bart's theatrical rumble. He ignored the taunt. Bart wasn't so easily deterred. "Just admiring your distinctive taste, Jeb. A man needs a wife he can look square in the eye. Wouldn't you agree?" Or do you prefer a perpetual upward gaze? This time the laughter was louder, laced with sharper barbs. Tallulah's nails bit into her palms. She longed to retort, to defend herself, but the words choked in her throat. She was an outsider, a spectacle. Any response would only amplify their glee. Jebediah straightened, revealing his full height. He towered over Bart, the disparity in their stances even more pronounced than their physical difference. Jeb exuded quiet might, while Bart's bluster seemed a flimsy facade, masking his own insecurities. Tallulah's got more grit than most folks around here, Bart, Jeb countered, his voice still measured but edged with steel. And a heart of gold, something you wouldn't know a damn thing about. The laughter sputtered and died. The men around Bart shifted, sensing a change in the air. This had moved beyond mere teasing. It was a challenge. Bart's face flushed crimson. Now hold on, Jeb. Just a joke. Some jokes ain't funny, Bart, Jeb retorted, his gaze unwavering. He closed the distance between them, especially when they're aimed at someone who can't fight back. Tallulah's breath caught. She had never witnessed this side of Jebediah. Always so reserved, so stoic. Yet now, he stood as her bulwark, defending her honor with a quiet intensity that both astonished and moved her. You accusing me of something, Jeb? Bart sputtered, taking a half-step back. I'm stating a fact, Jeb said, his voice dropping to a bare whisper, yet somehow filling the store with the force of a shout. Tallulah is my wife. You disrespect her, you disrespect me. The silence in the store was thick and suffocating. Every eye was glued to them, wide with anticipation. This was more than just a squabble. It was a showdown, an affront to Bart Higgins's inflated ego. Jebediah hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a single threatening move. He simply stood there, his presence radiating a composed strength that was far more unnerving than any outburst. Bart swallowed hard, his bravado visibly shrinking. He scanned the faces of the other men, searching for validation, but found none. They were all waiting to see which way he would jump. Finally, he broke eye contact. All right, Jeb, he mumbled, his voice stripped of its usual swagger. No harm intended. See that it stays that way. Jeb stated, his voice firm. He turned back to the counter and began gathering the items on his list, his movements deliberate and precise. Tallulah stood beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She glanced at Jebediah, a silent expression of gratitude in her eyes. He met her gaze, his expression softening ever so slightly. He gave her hand a brief, gentle squeeze before turning his attention back to Bart. The tension in the store remained palpable, but the balance of power had tilted. Bart Higgins had been publicly put in his place, and Jebediah Stone had revealed himself as a force to be reckoned with. The townsfolk had witnessed a display of loyalty and protection that wouldn't soon fade from memory. And Tallulah, standing beside her husband, felt a fragile spark of hope ignite within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could carve out a place for herself in this harsh land, with a man willing to stand by her, even against the weight of prejudice. Cyclone's comfort. The frantic pounding on the cabin door ripped Tallulah from a dream of fireflies and honeysuckle, a stark contrast to the heavy woolen blanket smothering her in the Montana chill. Jebediah stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face a mask of grim concern etched into the early morning light. Cyclone's hurt, he said, the words clipped and tight, unusual for even him. Real bad. Tallulah scrambled from bed, the urgency in Jebediah's voice sending a jolt of fear through her. She threw on her warmest shawl and followed him, her bare feet finding the familiar path to the barn almost instinctively now. The air hung heavy with the scent of hay and manure, but beneath it, a metallic tang of blood sharpened her senses. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Two ranch hands, their faces etched with worry, milled around Cyclone's stall. The magnificent black stallion, normally a picture of vibrant energy, stood trembling, his near hind leg angled awkwardly. A deep gash ran along his flank, glistening crimson in the lantern light. Tried to kick through the stall, looks like one of the hands, a wiry man named Hank, muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Found him like this about an hour ago. Jebediah was already inside the stall, his hands running gently over Cyclone's neck, murmuring soothing words. But the stallion remained agitated, his eyes wide and rolling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He shifted nervously, the sound of his hooves scraping against the wooden floor sending shivers down Tallulah's spine. "Easy, boy, easy," Jebediah repeated, his voice strained. He tried to inspect the wound more closely, but Cyclone flinched violently, nearly knocking Jebediah off his feet. "He won't let anyone near it, Jeb," Hank said, his voice laced with frustration. "Try to clean it, but he just rears up. Don't want him making it worse." Tallulah watched, her heart aching for the magnificent animal, and "Tallulah, he's in pain. He could hurt you." "I know," she said, taking a deep breath. She understood the risk, but something in Cyclone's frantic eyes called to her. She had always had a way with animals, a quiet empathy that seemed to soothe even the most skittish creatures. Slowly, deliberately, she approached the stall. The air crackled with tension, the only sound Cyclone's labored breathing. She stopped a few feet away, letting him see her, letting him smell her. She didn't reach out, didn't speak. She simply stood there, radiating a sense of calm. Cyclone shifted, his gaze fixed on her. He snorted, a puff of air ruffling her hair. Tallulah remained still, her eyes locked on his. She saw the fear, the pain, but she also saw something else, a flicker of curiosity, a hesitant glimmer of trust. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her voice soft and low, barely audible above the rustling hay. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." She took another step, then another, until she was close enough to touch him. She reached out her hand, slowly, extending it towards his velvet muzzle. He flinched, but didn't pull away. She gently stroked his face, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of his cheekbone. "There you go," she whispered. "Good boy." To everyone's astonishment, Cyclone seemed to relax. His breathing slowed, his muscles loosened. He lowered his head, nuzzling her hand. Emboldened, Tallulah moved closer, her gaze fixed on the wound. It was deep, jagged, and undoubtedly painful. She could see why he wouldn't let anyone near it. "Can you fetch me some warm water and clean cloths?" she asked Jebediah, her voice calm and steady. He stared at her, dumbfounded, before snapping out of his trance and nodding to Hank. As Hank hurried to fetch the supplies, Tallulah continued to soothe Cyclone, her touch gentle and reassuring. She spoke to him in a low, soothing voice, telling him stories of her childhood pets, of the stray cats she had nursed back to health, of the time she had rescued a baby bird from a storm. She didn't know if he understood the words, but he seemed to respond to the tone, to the rhythm of her voice. When Hank returned with the water and cloths, Tallulah carefully began to clean the wound. Cyclone flinched at first, but she continued to talk to him, her voice a constant murmur of comfort. Slowly, patiently, she cleaned away the blood and debris, revealing the extent of the damage. Jebediah watched, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had never seen Cyclone so calm, so trusting with anyone but him. And he had certainly never seen Tallulah so confident, so capable. The small-town woman he had married, the woman he had initially seen as fragile and out of place, was now standing before him, radiating a strength and compassion he had never imagined. As Tallulah finished cleaning the wound, she looked up at Jebediah, her eyes shining with a quiet triumph. "He needs a vet," she said, "but I think I've made him comfortable enough until he gets here." Jebediah simply nodded, unable to find the words to express his gratitude, his admiration. In that moment, standing in the dim light of the barn, surrounded by the scent of horses and hay, he saw Tallulah not as a mail-order bride, but as something far more valuable, a partner, a friend, and a woman who possessed a quiet strength that could calm even the wildest of storms. Whispers of bad luck. The whispers started subtly, like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. Bart Higgins, perched on a stool at the mercantile, made sure everyone within earshot heard him lamenting the unnatural weather lately. "Never seen Cyclone laid up like that," he'd say, shaking his head. Bad omen, I tell you. Bad omen for the whole valley. He glanced pointedly at Tallulah as she passed, her arms laden with flour and sugar, the ingredients for a peace offering apple pie for Jeb. He never said her name, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Tallulah Bellwether, the stranger in redemption, was the source of their misfortune. The townsfolk, already wary of outsiders, were easily swayed. The drought had lingered longer than usual, the crops were failing, and now Jeb's prize stallion was injured. It wasn't logical, but fear rarely was. Superstition, like a stubborn weed, took root in the parched soil of their anxieties. Tallulah tried to ignore it. She focused on mastering the wood-burning stove, on coaxing life from the small vegetable garden Jeb had reluctantly allowed her to plant, on learning the rhythm of ranch life. Jeb, bless his quiet soul, seemed oblivious to the growing unease, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore it, a tactic he employed for most things he found unpleasant. Then came the day the cattle scattered. Jeb had left before dawn, herding the herd towards the south pasture, a vast expanse of grazing land bordering the creek. Tallulah was scrubbing the breakfast dishes when she heard the thunderous sound of hooves, a frantic, chaotic drumming that shook the very foundations of the house. She ran outside, shading her eyes against the harsh sunlight. A swirling cloud of dust billowed in the distance, obscuring the cattle, but the panicked bellows carried on the wind. Jeb, a lone figure on horseback, was trying to regain control, his silhouette etched against the blinding sky. By the time Jeb managed to round up most of the herd, several were missing, likely lost in the rugged hills. He returned, his face grim, dust coating his usually stoic expression. He didn't say a word, but the set of his jaw spoke volumes. That evening, Tallulah ventured into town to replenish their dwindling supplies. The atmosphere at the mercantile was thick with unspoken accusations. Mrs. Olson, usually chatty, averted her gaze. Even young Billy, who usually pestered her for a piece of candy, hid behind his mother's skirt. As she reached for a bolt of fabric, she overheard a hushed conversation between two women huddled near the flour sacks. "Heard Jeb lost a good number of his herd today," one whispered, her voice laced with a mixture of pity and something else, fear. "Serves him right," the other replied, her tone sharp. "Shouldn't have brought that woman here. Everyone knows it's bad luck to bring in a stranger during a dry spell." Tallulah froze, the blood draining from her face. She slowly placed the fabric back on the shelf, her hands trembling. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was open condemnation. She paid for her few necessities in silence, the weight of their disapproval pressing down on her like a physical burden. As she stepped out onto the dusty street, she saw Bart Higgins leaning against the saloon, a smug expression on his face. He raised his hat in a mocking salute. That night, the silence in the small house felt heavier than usual. Jeb sat at the table, meticulously cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and deliberate. Tallulah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She was an outsider, a stranger, a source of bad luck. The loneliness she had tried so hard to bury resurfaced, a suffocating wave threatening to drown her. She was alone, truly alone, in a land that didn't want her, a life that didn't fit. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her reflection. She couldn't do this anymore. She wouldn't. Leaving redemption. The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of despair. Not the clean, pine-infused air that usually filled it, but a heavy, stagnant odor that clung to the walls like dust. Tallulah ran a hand over the worn leather of her small valise. It was the same bag she'd arrived with, brimming with naive hope and dreams of a life she now knew was impossible. Outside, the wind howled, mirroring the tempest raging within her. Each gust rattled the window panes, a mournful symphony accompanying her retreat. She folded her best dress, the one she'd worn to the town social, a social that now felt like a distant, cruel joke, and placed it carefully in the bag. Then her shawl, the one Jeb had complimented the color of, saying it reminded him of the twilight sky after a summer storm. Even his kindness now felt like a painful reminder of everything she was losing. She paused, her fingers hovering over a small, intricately carved wooden horse Jeb had given her, a token of gratitude after she'd healed Diablo. It was a testament to his quiet thoughtfulness, a side of him so few others seemed to see. Tears welled in her eyes. This was the hardest thing to leave behind. Not the ranch, not the town, but the man who had, for a fleeting moment, made her believe she could belong. She closed the valise, the snap of the latch echoing in the silence. Each item packed was a piece of her hope, now carefully folded and stored away, perhaps to be resurrected in another life, another place. She glanced around the cabin, trying to memorize every detail. The chipped enamel of the coffee pot, the worn rug by the hearth, the rifle hanging above the door. A silent guardian she wouldn't have the right to call hers any longer. As she reached for the door, a shadow fell across the threshold. Jeb stood there, his face unreadable in the dim light. He held her pack bag in his hand. "Where do you think you're going, Tallulah?" His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through the small space. She swallowed hard, trying to find the words that wouldn't break her completely. I can't stay here, Jeb. I'm bringing you nothing but trouble." He stepped into the cabin, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. The sound felt final, like a judgment. He set the valise on the floor, his gaze unwavering. "Trouble? Is that what you think you are? They blame me for everything, Jeb. The drought, the sick cattle, even the damn wind, probably. I can see it in their eyes. And now your cattle are scattered. It's all my fault." Her voice cracked, betraying her vulnerability. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small space. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. The unexpected tenderness made her tears spill over. "Look at me, Tallulah." She met his gaze, her own filled with a mixture of fear and longing. His eyes, usually guarded, were now open, honest, and filled with something she hadn't dared to hope for. "They're wrong, Tallulah. They're scared, and they need someone to blame. But I know you. I know your heart. You're not bad luck. You're a blessing." She shook her head, unconvinced. "But I'm not what you need, Jeb. I can't." He cut her off, his voice firm. "You're wrong. You're exactly what I need. Strong, kind, with a spirit that won't break, no matter what life throws at you." He paused, his gaze softening. "I admire you, Tallulah, more than I can say." He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something he'd kept hidden for too long. "Before you came, this place, it was just land. Just cattle. Just work. You brought life back into it, Tallulah. You brought me to life." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of nervousness. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I know this. I need you here. Not to fix my ranch, not to appease the town, but because I care about you, Tallulah, more than I ever thought possible." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Don't leave, Tallulah. Please." The flood. The sky, bruised purple and swollen with rain, had been threatening all morning. Jeb had been tracking it, his gaze constantly shifting from the chores at hand to the roiling clouds gathering over the distant peaks. Tallulah, still reeling from the previous night's confession, found herself watching Jeb, his quiet intensity a comforting presence in the face of the impending storm. Around midday, the first fat drops began to fall, splattering against the window panes like shattered glass. Then, the deluge arrived, a relentless, drumming rain that swallowed the ranch in a gray curtain. The creek behind the house, usually a gentle trickle, began to roar. Jeb, his face grim, burst through the door, water streaming from his hat. "The river's rising fast. Faster than I've ever seen. We need to get to town. Help folks evacuate." Tallulah didn't hesitate. She grabbed her slicker, the familiar weight grounding her, and followed Jeb out into the storm. The wind howled, tearing at their clothes, and the rain stung her face. The air crackled with an almost palpable energy. By the time they reached Redemption, the river had already breached its banks, turning Main Street into a churning brown torrent. Buildings stood knee-deep in water, and panic was etched on the faces of the townsfolk. Bart Higgins, his face red with alarm, was shouting orders, but his voice was lost in the roar of the water. Seeing Mrs. Abernathy struggling to keep her footing near the general store, Tallulah waded into the water without a second thought. The current tugged at her legs, threatening to sweep her off her feet, but she braced herself, using her height and strength to her advantage. She reached Mrs. Abernathy, scooped the elderly woman into her arms as if she were a child, and carried her to higher ground. "Bless you, child," Mrs. Abernathy gasped, clutching Tallulah's hand. "Bless you." Tallulah didn't pause. She waded back into the swirling water, spotting a group of children huddled on the porch of the schoolhouse, their faces pale with fear. The water was rising rapidly, lapping at their feet. Jeb, meanwhile, was guiding people towards the church on the hill, its sturdy stone walls offering some semblance of safety. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his presence a calming force amidst the chaos. He saw Tallulah struggling against the current with the children, and his eyes softened with pride. As Tallulah reached the schoolhouse, a terrified yelp pierced the air. Little Timmy Olsen's puppy, Buster, had slipped from his grasp and was being swept away by the raging river. Without hesitation, Tallulah plunged into the deeper water, her long legs churning against the current. She spotted Buster, a small, furry ball of terror, clinging to a piece of driftwood. Reaching him, she scooped him up and, fighting against the relentless pull of the river, made her way back to the schoolhouse, where sobbing Timmy was waiting. The rescue of Buster seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. Others, emboldened by Tallulah's bravery, began to help each other. Men formed a human chain to rescue livestock stranded in the flooded fields, while women carried supplies to the church. Even Bart Higgins, his bluster momentarily subdued, was helping to sandbag the bank near his precious mercantile. The rain continued to fall, but the panic began to subside, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Tallulah, soaked to the bone and exhausted, stood beside Jeb, watching the townsfolk work together. The fear in her heart, the fear of not belonging, began to recede, washed away by the flood of shared experience. Jeb turned to her, his eyes filled with a warmth she hadn't seen before. He reached out, his calloused hand gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You're something special, Tallulah Bellwether," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something real special." His words, simple and heartfelt, were more powerful than any grand declaration. In that moment, standing amidst the chaos and destruction, Tallulah knew that she had found her place, not just in redemption, but in Jeb's heart. The flood had brought devastation, but it had also revealed a truth, that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit, like the river, could rise and find its way. A new beginning. Redemption resembled a child's overturned toy box after the deluge. Buildings bore the scars of the river's wrath. Fences lay in fractured heaps, and a gritty silt blanketed every surface. The crisp pine scent had vanished, replaced by a damp, acrid odor of corroded metal and rotting wood. Yet, from this devastation rose a collective resolve, a spirit that outstripped the flood's fury. Residents emerged from makeshift havens, their expressions etched with worry but firm. The relentless work of clearing the wreckage began, each person intent on reclaiming what remained and assisting their neighbors. The days of impact had faded, and now a shared determination to rebuild ignited within them. Watching from the stone ranch house veranda, Tallulah felt a sharp prick of conscience. The temptation to flee, to leave behind the small-mindedness and unkind whispers, had been strong. But witnessing the grit of these battered souls, their faces daubed with mud and fatigue, stoked a different sort of fire in her belly. Jebediah, predictably, was already immersed in the thick of it, his powerful frame straining as he helped Mrs. Abernathy upright her precarious chicken coop. His movements were efficient and calm, his presence a reassuring anchor amidst the turmoil. Days became a grueling blur of exertion. Tallulah, joined the women in organizing provisions, her height suddenly an asset as she reached high shelves and sorted through donations. She learned the satisfying thud of a hammer, repairing the general store's fractured walls one swing at a time, each a small victory over her own self-doubt. As dusk painted the sky in vibrant shades of peach and lavender one evening, Bart Higgins approached Tallulah. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by an awkwardness that sat ill on his features. He shuffled, avoiding her eyes. "Miss Bellwether," he mumbled, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I owe you an apology. My conduct, it was out of line. You rescued my livelihood, my family's. And, well, you've got backbone, a sight more than I figured." Tallulah was stunned. Bart Higgins admitting fault? An unimaginable event. "Thank you, Mr. Higgins," she replied carefully. "I appreciate it." The apology, however clumsy, felt like a breach in the wall of prejudice that had confined her. As the town gradually reconstituted itself, Tallulah found herself engrossed in the practical problems of restoration. She noticed structural flaws, ineffective tools. An idea blossomed, a synthesis of her engineering understanding and the available resources. Evenings were now spent filling notebooks with sketches of reinforced supports, improved pulley systems, and more ergonomic tools. Initially puzzled by her diagrams, Jebediah quickly recognized her ingenuity. "You've got a talent for this, Tallulah," he observed one evening, studying her rendering of a modified plow. A real talent. Together, they began translating her concepts into reality. She crafted sturdier hinges for barn doors, conceived a more stable base for the schoolhouse, and invented a new shovel that eased the strain of labor. The townsfolk, initially wary, soon succumbed to the undeniable superiority of her creations. Her unusual capabilities, once mocked, were now a prized advantage. Hands once scorned for their size were now lauded for their skill. A mind once written off as too unorthodox was now sought for its innovative solutions. On a clear autumn morning, as the last vestiges of the flood receded into memory, Jebediah guided Tallulah to the loftiest point of his property. The valley unfolded before them, a rich panorama of verdant fields and golden grasses under Montana's expansive sky. Turning to her, his clear blue eyes unwavering, he took her hands, his rough palms surprisingly gentle against her skin. "Tallulah," he said, his voice deep and sincere, "you've breathed life back into this town and into me. I ain't much with words, but I need you to know I love you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Tallulah's vision. It wasn't just the words, but the depth of feeling in his tone, the honesty in his gaze. It was the culmination of their shared trials, the unspoken bond that had grown between them. "Yes, Jebediah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." Their wedding became a celebration of resilience, of community, of blossoming love. The townsfolk, bound together by shared hardship, united to create a joyous occasion. Mrs. Abernathy baked a magnificent cake decorated with wildflowers. Timmy, Buster yipping at his heels in excitement, presented Tallulah with a small bouquet of hand-picked daisies. Bart Higgins, still a bit flushed, offered a toast, commending Tallulah's inventiveness and her indomitable spirit. Standing beside Jebediah, her hand secure in his, Tallulah felt a sense of belonging she had never known. Looking at the faces of those who had once ostracized her, now smiling and celebrating with her, she saw not judgment, but acceptance, not scorn, but respect. As they exchanged vows beneath the wide Montana heavens, Tallulah understood she had finally found her place. She was no longer just Tallulah Bellwether, the mail-order bride who was too tall. She was Tallulah Stone, integral to this community, a partner to Jebediah, and a woman who had discovered her purpose in the heart of the American West. More than a marriage, this was a genesis,